and its people. Welcome to the second edition of Historic Fontana. At the close of the first edition, a request was made for your photos of bygone days and historical data. Your response has been most gratifying. To this edition has been added your most recent contributions. Also included are the historical sites as they appeared in the summer of 1990, and personal photos and short histories of the early residents. In closing, my request for additional history and photos continues. Thanks again for all your contributions. The Fontana historian, Mr. Lester Orcutt, was born in Milton, Wisconsin in 1901. The family moved to Fontana in 1902. Lester Orcutt attended the Fontana Grade School, the Walworth High School, and the University of Wisconsin. During his school years, he worked in Simmons' grocery store, Coventry's garage, and the Fontana gravel pit. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin, he was employed by General Motors Corporation. Retiring in 1962, but being active all his life, he took the position of building inspector in his hometown, Fontana, Wisconsin. After a few years as an inspector, he then turned to political cartooning. His drawings and thoughts can now be viewed and read in the weekly Walworth Times. In 1634, Jean Nicolet, a French explorer, was the first white man to enter the area we now know as Wisconsin. He was searching for the all-water route to the Far East China. Thinking he was in China, he donned Chinese robes and as he stepped ashore fired his pistols. The Indians who witnessed his arrival disappeared into the forest. On this map of Wisconsin is outlined the area of his landing, now known as Green Bay, Wisconsin. Almost 200 years later, a government Indian agent, John Kinsey, and his party of 12 were traveling from Fort Dearborn, now Chicago, Illinois, to Fort Winnebago, now Portage, Wisconsin, and their selected route via the Indian trails resulted in their discovery of a beautiful expanse of water. The Indians, Potawatomis, who lived around the lake called it Kishwaukee, translation, Lake of Clear Water. As the Indian chief name was Bigfoot, the Kinseys named the lake Bigfoot in honor of their chief. The approximate route of the Kinsey party on their journey from Fort Dearborn to Fort Winnebago. The numbers indicate the villages or settlements along their route. Number 1, Fort Dearborn, now Chicago, Illinois. Number 2, Des Plaines, Illinois. Number 3, Crystal Lake, Illinois. Number 4, Bigfoot Lake, the site of the Potawatomi village and now the village of Fontana, Wisconsin. At this point they turned due west and crossed Turtle Creek at Point 5, just north of Beloit. At that time there was a large Indian settlement in that area. After crossing Turtle Creek, they turned north-northeast and crossed Rock River at point number 6, 1 mile northeast of Lake Koshkonong. Number 7 is the village of Sun Prairie, and number 8, Fort Winnebago, now Portage, Wisconsin. Fort Winnebago was the destination of the Kinsey party. Located on the Fox River, it was here that the Portage to Wisconsin River commenced, about a 2-mile overland trek. A town soon grew and became known as Portage, Wisconsin. As the Kinsey party descended a long hill, we know it as Glenwood Hill, they were greeted by a beautiful expanse of water. This is a photocopy of Mrs. McKinsey's drawing when first viewing the west end of the lake. The original is displayed in the Wisconsin Historical Society Museum in Madison, Wisconsin. To the left and center, the Gravel Pit Hill. To the right, at the base of the hill, 4 or 5 Indian lodges. Bottom left, Glenwood Springs area, then the Fontana Swimming Beach, and finally the business lakefront. There is a monument near the shore path in Glenwood Springs that reads, "The old Indian trail from the foot of Lake Michigan passed a short distance south of this point. From it, the first white visitors, the Kinsey party from Chicago, saw the lake, May 1831. This is Glenwood Hill in the 1930s. The Kinsey party first viewed the lake from this hill. This memorial stone and plaque are located at the intersection of Kinsey and Lake Avenue. The inscription reads, "A village of Potawatomi Indians occupied the rising ground to the west of this point, when the first whites visited the lake, May 1831. The intention of these Indians to join the hostiles in the Black Hawk War of 1832 was defeated by Shibona, an Ottawa Indian friendly to the whites, who here learned of the impending attack and warned the settlers. The Indian lands were bought by the United States at the Great Council at Chicago in 1833, and the Indians were removed to the Western Reservation in 1836. Facts about the lake. At first called Kishwaukito, translation Lake of Clear Water. After the first visit of the white man, the name was changed to Bigfoot, Mong Suk in Indian, in honor of the local Indian chief, who was so named because of his tremendous feat. The lake covers an area of 5,504 acres, 7.7 miles in length, 2 miles at its widest part, 142 feet deep. It has approximately 27 miles of shoreline. An aerial view of the Fontana wetlands, affectionately referred to as the Slough, to the Potawatomi Indians, it was the source of many of their necessities. Fish from the stream and from the same area, muskrat, deer, fox, pheasant, ducks, and geese were harvested. The marsh grasses were used as insulation in the lodges, and reeds were woven into mats. Many of the settlers took advantage of the Slough's offerings. In the photo, on the left can be seen a dark, rectangle area that consisted of beautiful stand of oak and hickory trees. This section of the slough was higher in elevation than the surrounding area. This we named the island. Many of the village's Tom Sawyers would spend a day or night on the island. All this has disappeared, replaced by commercial enterprise. My last photo of the Fontana stream, so named by the first settlers. Photo taken looking west from Lake Drive. At this point, the stream turned and flowed north from about 300 yards, parallel to Lake Drive, before entering the lake. Shown here are some Indian trails. Red indicates the Fontana, Williams Bay, Duck Lake, now Lake Como Trail. Blue indicates the Fontana, Beloit, Galena Trail. Green line indicates Fontana, Bigfoot Lake, and the Chicago Trail. Brown line marks Fontana, Conference Point, Williams Bay Trail. All information taken from an archaeological map of Lake Geneva. Author Quincy A. Higman. A portion of the 1873 Land Atlas showing the settlers in the Fontana area. George Reed, C. L. Douglas, Russell Crum, H. Bailey, Matthias Moore, F. Tulip, Walter Clark, and C. D. Pierce. This is a picture of John Brink, the government surveyor assigned to the southern area of the Northwest Territory in 1835. His orders read, "Name all lakes after the Indian tribes that inhabit the area." Upon viewing this beautiful lake, it reminded him of a lake near his home, Geneva, New York, so he named the lake Geneva. What should be known as Potawatomi Lake is now known as Geneva Lake. In 1836, a dam was built at the outlet of the lake to control the lake level and to power a water wheel. The outlet can be seen as one drives across the lakefront in Lake Geneva City. About 1840, stagecoaches commenced operation in the Wisconsin Territory. All stops were at roadhouses that served food and offered sleeping accommodations. One of the first routes was Southport, now Kenosha, Wisconsin, to Geneva, now the city of Lake Geneva, and on to Beloit. Another commenced at Fort Dearborn, now Chicago, Illinois, and went north along Lake Michigan shoreline to Milwaukee. The main east-west route across the Wisconsin Territory ran from Milwaukee to Prairie du Chien. Here is the published price list had you stopped at the Rhodes House, Medina, Wisconsin in 1848. Meals 25 cents each. Lodging one night 10 cents. Room and board a week $2.50. Boarding by the week $2. Daily rate, room and board 75 cents. Horses to grain and care 37.5 cents per day. In 1845, a sawmill was built by Charles Montague. The flow of the water to turn the water wheel was a race from a spring-fed pond that extended from in front of the sawmill south about 1,600 feet. The mill, as it appears today, a very attractive home. Picture taken summer of 1990. In 1907, Mr. R.D. Davis photographed the upper mill pond, which extended from the base of Douglas Hill, now Dewey Avenue, north to the Fontana schoolhouse. A smaller pond, named the lower, was situated a short distance to the east of the upper. The race from these ponds poured the water wheels of Fontana's two mills. To the right of the schoolhouse can be seen the Fontana Community Church. The church was moved in 1923 to Kinsey and Reed Street. The old mill pond, 83 years later, summer of 1990. The entire right side of the photo, both near and far, was the location of the mill pond. Mother Nature and man have reduced it to a roadside stream. A map of early Fontana. The numbers indicate the location of the grist mills. The vertical dark area to the left of the area below and to the left of the number 2 mill is the lower mill pond. Dams were built on the mill ponds and were opened when a good flow of water was needed to turn the water wheels. The black squares indicate the location of the early settlers' homes. The Fontana stream is very prominent in the lower portion of the diagram. In 1836, James Van Slyck built a log cabin home on the lakefront, location indicated by the number 4. Matthias Moore built in 1837, location indicated by the number 17. William Reed built a log house in 1839, site indicated by the number 18. It was Matthias Moore who named the area Fontana, a Swiss word meaning the springs, or an Italian word meaning the fountains. A photo of the country club archway, and it was in this area that Matthias Moore built his log home. C.L. Douglas built his barn in 1836, converted it into a restaurant in the early 1960s. In 1839, William A. Reed built a log home on the west end of Lake Geneva. This is a copy of the watercolor painting of his home. Artist Mrs. James Drew. Year of the painting, 1842, and now on display in the Wisconsin Historical Library in Madison, Wisconsin. To replace his log home, William Reed built his home just after the Civil War. The site on which William Reed built his homes has been made into a public park, and in honor and memory of the first settlers, it was named Pioneer Park. This is a photo of the Pioneer Park taken in the summer of 1990. This historic home is located at the northwest corner of the intersection of Mill and Main Street. Present owners are Jean Stevenson Harvey and husband Philip Harvey. Built in 1857, the architecture was of the stovewood style. The oak logs were first split and then cut into uniform sections, about 11 inches in length. These sections were then stacked to form the walls. Wet lime mortar was applied to the seams as a sealant. Masonry coating or wooden siding was applied to the exterior. Present-day photo of the home and a picture taken of the stovewood construction when a wall was being repaired. A sample of the stovewood method of construction in the Harvey residence. Also in 1857, the first steam yacht named the Gertie was launched. Built in Canada and shipped overland by Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, it was 50 feet in length and had a 2-cylinder steam engine, retired in 1890. The Douglas Flour Mill, built on Mill Street in 1857. It also used the race from the mill ponds to power the water wheel. Site across from Earl Street residence, operated into the 1890s. Note the electric power poles. This section of Fontana received electric power in 1905. The area as it appeared in the summer of 1990. Mother Nature has taken over. In 1860, a schoolhouse was built on top of Douglas Hill, now Dewey Avenue. Amos Hitchcock was the first teacher. While conducting school one day in 1861, a message was delivered to him that advised he had been commissioned a captain in the Northern forces of the Republic. He immediately dismissed school, locked up the house, and went off to war, serving in the Vicksburg campaign. This school was converted into a home in 1884. A writing slate was found that had these names written on it: Mary Marriott, Joseph Tulip, Henry Douglas, Lydia Russell, Charles Hyde, Thomas Blackwell, and Laura Blackwell. The first school as it appeared in the summer of 1990. The horse and buggy are parked at what is now the intersection of Mill Street and Main Street. This site had a spring that was used as a watering stop for horses. On this site in 1860, the first general store was built. The intersection of Main and Mill, 130 years later. From right to left, a liquor store has now replaced the barber shop and pool hall. Then comes the original general store, which has housed many businesses. And finally, the Porter grocery store and post office, which was moved into its original site on Mill Street to this location on Main Street, and now is a donut shop. This style of ice boat made its appearance in the early 1870s. An interesting item, the headgear of these hardy souls, top hats. This was the style of rowboats in the early 1870s. A brief history of Belvedere Park, founded and organized by people from Belvedere, Illinois in 1875. They purchased 3.5 acres of land from Mary Reed at a cost of $700. It was a 36-mile journey by horse and buggy from their home in Belvedere to the Geneva Lake. However, when the interurban commenced operation in 1899 and the CM St. Paul Railroad to Walworth in 1901, the horse and buggy days were over. By 1904, the park consisted of 18 homes and 18 chic sales outhouses. A race from the springs located in the hills to the west provided a good stream of water through the park. Spring houses were built to preserve the perishables as the water was at the consistent temperature of 54 degrees. Kerosene lanterns were placed about the park to provide light, and in 1916 electricity became available. The park would charter the Lady of the Lake or the Lucius Newberry and would hold church services or parties. Belvedere's Park Lakefront in 1876. Belvedere's Lakefront in 1990, 114 years later. The Nettie B., winner of the regatta in 1874, as General Philip Sheridan, was a frequent visitor to the lake and interested in the races. A trophy was designed and named in his honor, the Sheridan Cup. The Nettie B. was classified as yacht in that era, being 24.25 feet in length. In 1892, her racing days were over. She was given a lake burial, now resting on the bottom of Geneva Bay. I have always wondered what became of the excursion steamers that plied the waters of Geneva Lake. Mr. Larry Larkin, in his book Full Speed Ahead, answered my question. This is a depth chart of Geneva Lake. Most of the boats, with their superstructures removed, were towed to the deepest part of the lake and sunk. The numbers indicate their burial sites. Listed are the names of the excursion boats and the year of their lake burial. Number 1, Lady of the Lake, 1893. Number 2, Lucius Newberry, 1890. Number 3, Majestic, 1947. Number 4, Harvard, 1931. Number 5, Aurora, 1931. Number 6, Columbia, 1895. Ed Quigley, a Geneva businessman, commissioned boat builder John French to build the Lady of the Lake, a double-decked sidewheeler. Launched May 10, 1873, and retired in 1893. The vessel was taken to the lower duct hole. There the superstructure was removed, the hull filled with rocks, and towed out into the lake and sunk. The Lucius Newberry was built by John French. It too was a sidewheeler with 2 decks, a 125 horsepower engine, 115 feet in length, 30-foot beam, and could accommodate 700 passengers. It carried a bronze bell that was taken from a cathedral during the Mexican-American War. The launching date was April 24, 1875, and in 1889 its name was changed to the City of Lake Geneva. One night when moored to the dock, a fire broke out, and to save the boats moored nearby, the Lucius Newberry was cut loose. It drifted out into the Geneva Bay, burned, and sank. The cause of the fire never determined, but the theory advanced people would sleep on the boat at night, and some of their doings was the cause. Scuba divers found the remains in 1981 in 60 feet of water. This is the forward top deck of the Lady of the Lake, built in 1873 and retired in 1891. The lone passenger has been identified as Basil Baker, an early resident of Fontana. Mr. Baker became well known for his accuracy with rifles and handguns. He was featured with the Bill Cody Circus, entertaining the spectators with his trick and fancy shooting. This is a Rutherford D. Davis home, grandson of C. L. Douglas, built in 1875 and still standing, located north and east of the intersection of Dewey and Main Street. In 1884, the government established a post office in Fontana. The general store was selected as the site, and the owner-operator of the store, J.B. Davis, became the first postmaster. C. L. Douglas started the gravel pit in 1875. It was leased to Hogan Maxon for a time, and then Claude Stevenson operated it into the 1930s. Finally, it became the Lake Geneva Sand and Gravel, under the supervision of Max Janke, the photo taken in 1900. The rush hour at Fontana Mall in 1910, 8 people, 3 horses, and 2 buggies. The Interurban commenced operation, Walworth, Fontana, Harvard, Illinois, in 1899. Ice stored in the barns of the Boyle Ice Company, which were located on the lakefront, was transported by boxcars to Harvard, and then by Chicago and Northwestern into Chicago. The photo shows cars coming into Fontana to be loaded with ice. Terrace Glen Livery, located at the corner of High Street and 3rd Avenue, owned and operated by an early resident, J. E. Wells. The house and barn, stables, are still standing. The barn, after being used for livestock, became a dance hall in the 1930s. Throughout the ensuing years, it has housed many light industries. In addition to Porter's Park, which he established in 1875, D.C. Porter built a livery stable in 1880, the site just east of Fontana Community Church. The first steel hull yacht on Lake Geneva was built in 1891, 70 feet in length. She was first named Whileaway, and when sold to the Excursion Boat Company in 1925, the name was changed to Majestic. In 1947, while backing away from a pier, an explosion and fire occurred. All the passengers were rescued, but the hull was so damaged it was rendered useless. The hull was taken out and sunk in the deepest part of the lake. In 1906, George F. Orcutt opened the pavilion to accommodate roller skating, basketball, church services, Catholic, meetings, and dances. Site was just west of Jean Rossmiller's residence. Standing in front of the pavilion, left to right, Lauren Orcutt, George Orcutt, and Claire Orcutt. C. Douglas purchased the pavilion from George Orcutt. It was then traded to Reuben Dade in 1912 for his 115-acre farm in North Walworth. Reuben Dade turned it into an amusement center. The pavilion site as it appeared in the summer of 1990. A home and commercial building now occupy that area. The Bliss children at Porter's Park in the summer of 1890. Their parents owned and operated the Janesville Daily Gazette. In 1892, view of a portion of Porter's Park. The park provided wooden platforms over which the summer residents would erect their tents. Here's a view from the pier that served Porter's Park. Along with the tent platforms, cabins were available as seen on both sides of the recreation hall. The Lester Porters on the steps of Glenwood Springs Hotel in 1897. Lester Porter's father, Doric, built Porter's Park in 1875. Reading left to right, Lester Porter, his wife Loretta, Amos on the lap of his mother, Irma, and last the housekeeper. In 1894, Glenwood Springs Hotel opened. Mr. Tom Marshall from Harvard, Illinois, owner and builder. In the late 1850s, Geneva Lake became well known as a fisherman's paradise. During the months of May, June, and July, the mayflies were in season, and the flies would swarm just above the surface of the lake. This would draw the cisco, a species of whitefish, to the surface to feed on the flies. The schools of ciscos were so dense, only dip nets and seines were needed to catch the fish. A cisco is approximately 8 inches in length, silvery white in color with a streak of blue or gray along the dorsal area. When this run occurred, it was telegraphed to neighboring cities, and for weeks the lake was covered with boats. This fish was considered a delicacy to eat, easy to fillet, and provided the natives added income. They were also shipped into Chicago to be served in many of the better restaurants. In the early 1900s, L.P. Coventry pioneered cisco fishing after the summer run was over. In the fall and winter months, foregoing dip nets and seines, he used a waxed line and a gold-beaded snelled hook. By continuously bobbing the line, the cisco was attracted and would bite. When the weather became too cold to sit in the open boat, he made an old sailboat into a fishing scow. An opening was made in the bottom and welled up to the top of the gunwale. A tar paper house was attached to the deck. He solved the cisco fishing during inclement weather. Mr. Lot P. Coventry was born in 1884 on a farm 2 miles north of Harvard, Illinois. He moved to Fontana in the early 1900s and became a pilot on the excursion boat Geneva. After leaving the pilot job, he opened a boat rental business and had the agency for Buick and Pontiac cars. In 1953, he retired and moved to Hayward, Wisconsin, then to Winneconne, Wisconsin. He passed away in 1966 at the age of 82. A new school was built in 1893 across from the Douglas flour mill. The first custodian was Merrill Robinson's father, Amos Robinson. The school, 97 years later. An 1895 photo of the school and its entire student body of 28. Mr. Morris Morrissey, principal. This is a photo of Reed's Ice Cream Parlor in 1900, located on the corner of Lake Avenue and 3rd Street. This building was moved to the back of the lot in the mid-1920s. Operated as a dance hall, first known as the Blue Moon, and later as the Green Lantern. Closed in 1930 due to the Depression. An interior view of the parlor. Fontana's lakefront received electric power in 1909. The Chicago, Harvard, Lake Geneva Railway Company incorporated in 1896. Mr. H. S. Williams of Harvard, Illinois, was the prime instigator. Work was started in 1898 and completed in 1899. A powerhouse was built in Walworth just south of the train depot. First run July 4, 1899. On its maiden trip were H. S. Bell, W. O. Clark, A. H. Hitchcock, G. H. Merwin, and the motorman was F. Perlett. The route of the inner urban from Harvard, Illinois, to the lakefront in Fontana, Wisconsin. Out of Harvard, the stops were Oak Grove, Illinois, Bigfoot Prairie, Illinois, Walworth, Wisconsin, and finally the end of the line, Fontana, Wisconsin. The yellow line portrays a variable route from Walworth to Fontana. The route from Harvard to Fontana covered a distance of 11 miles, and the fare was 20 cents. 1898. A construction crew laying the tracks for the interurban trolley. The Ladies' Aid Society of Fontana incorporated in 1889. Members were Mrs. Dorliska Reed, Mrs. Hat Ward, Mrs. Frances Godfrey, Mrs. Mary Douglas, Mrs. Carrie Francis, Mrs. Callie Lewis, and Mrs. Josephine Ripley. After securing the Articles of Incorporation, they purchased land from C.L. Douglas and built the Fontana Community Church. Located on the bend of West Main, across from the gravel pit. Previous to the church being built, services were being held outdoors or in the homes of Mrs. Reed, Mrs. Godfrey, or Mrs. Douglas. In 1923, the church was moved to the corner of Reed and Kinsey Street. In 1927, a new church was constructed and attached to the original church. When one visits the east room of today's complex, you are in the original church. This fine home now occupies the area on which the first community church was constructed. Fontana grew in population and industry during that later half of the 1800s and the early 1900s. C.L. Douglas operated 2 grist mills and a gravel pit. The interurban commenced operation in 1899. The Boyle Ice Company started harvesting and storing ice in 1896. In 1906, G. F. Orcutt opened the pavilion for dancing, auctions, roller skating, church services, Catholic, and basketball games. Charles Palmer opened a boat factory in 1908. During the same era, Reuben Dade and John Mulligan opened a blacksmith shop. Hugh Baker developed a large business in honey. Mr. Godfrey had a small boat plant on Mill Street, and D. A. Reed opened an ice cream parlor on the lakefront. In 1899, a view from offshore Porter's Park. The boats at anchor belonged to the park and were rented out to the summer residents. The date on this picture is 1910. The view looking north from the bottom of Mill Street. Douglas Mill, built in 1857, is center left. general store at the north end of the mill street operated by J.B. Davis. The post office began operation from the general store in 1884. Fontana received electric power to this section of the village in 1905. During the summer of 1990, looking north from the south end of Mill Street. Charles Long, native of the area, born 1882. He was a carpenter by trade, building many of the homes and piers on the lake. In this picture he is displaying his catch of ciscos, a species of whitefish. The fishing gear consisted of a semi-waxed line and a gold bead on a snelled hook. Mrs. Evelyn Long Lehman in front of Quinn's greenhouse, where she was employed for many years. A native of Fontana, always active in the community church, and has become well known for her quilting. Two of her many contributions are the pictures, Fontana Swimming Beach in 1910 and the Upper Mill Pond in 1907. Mr. Michael Quinn was one of the early entrepreneurs, establishing a large floral business. He was also on the first village board when Fontana incorporated in 1924. The section of the business district that fronted Mill Street, the bakery on the left, center is the combined Porter store and post office, and on the right is Benner's Meat Market. In the summer of 1990, all that remains of that section fronting Mill Street, the bakery, and that has been changed into a small cafe. This 1900 photo shows a portion of the lower mill pond. Also shown is a grist mill top left, next the school before the second story was added, and to the extreme right the Fontana Church. Here's a schoolroom scene in 1900. Note the coal oil lamp hanging overhead. The school received electric power in 1905. Mail destined for Williams Bay came into Fontana by the interurban Toonerville trolley and was transported to Williams Bay by horse and buggy. Simmons Grocery Store in the background. This photo carried a date of 1905. From 1909 to 1917, the mail for Williams Bay was delivered by Anna Baker in her 1908 Ford. Miss Helen Porter standing next to the mail car. Anna Baker with a load of mail, as mentioned previously. The mail came into Fontana on the interurban streetcar. In 1902, a second story was added to the Fontana School, resulting in 2 additional rooms. Quite prominent are the fire escapes of that era, the extension ladders hanging on the side of the building. Also quite prominent is the mill pond that extended from in front of the school, southwest to Dewey Avenue. The race from this pond powered the water wheels of the 2 mills. This is Reed's Landing in 1905. Reed's Swimming Pier in the foreground and just beyond the main commercial pier at which the excursion boats docked. Pictured is one of our very early residents who was very instrumental in the building of Fontana, both structurally and spiritually, Mr. Eugene Sullivan. Born in 1871, his entire life was spent in the Walworth-Fontana area. He began working as a teamster for the road department. When trucks replaced horses in the early 1920s, he was then employed by the Fontana Sand and Gravel Company. He was a member of the first village board when the village incorporated in 1924, and most influential in getting the Catholic Church built in the village. But his first love and source of pride was the Fontana Grade School. He kept all features of the 4-room school in excellent condition, and all students had great love and respect for Mr. Sullivan. I know this to be a fact. I spent 8 years at the school. This is a photo of his horse-drawn road grader. 2 of the Sullivan girls are aboard, Mary Jean on the left and Pauline on the right. What a surprise they have coming. They forgot to hitch up the horses. This 1916 photo shows the steamer Alert bringing visitors to the Fontana Pier. The tracks running the full length of the pier were for the small cars that hauled coal and baggage to the steamers. In 1896, the Boyle Ice Company out of Chicago built 2 ice storage barns on the Fontana lakefront. One was located behind the interurban depot, the other was located behind Chuck's Tavern. As the Ice Boyle Company hired about 100 men during ice cutting and storage season, the company built a rooming house that was located on what is now a parking lot just south of the boardroom. In 1916, the storage barn behind the depot was destroyed by a windstorm. About 1930, the Boyle rooming house was destroyed by fire. The ice storage barn, Chuck's, was removed in the 1940s. Cutting ice at Fontana, Wisconsin, February 18, 1909. Transporting the cut blocks of ice to the storage barn's conveyor. The early 1900s, this picture taken from the top of the gravel pit looking south down Mill Street. Mill Street today, summer of 1990. The white rail fence surrounds the historic home of Jean and Philip Harvey. Delivery boys of 1915, Les Sullivan on the right and George Finley on the left, and the supervisor is sitting behind George. Here they were delivering a load of sweet corn. However, their main work was hauling suitcases and trunks for the passengers of the interurban. The early 1900s, Fontana boat livery built and operated by Mr. Coventry. Left to right, Mr. Coventry, unidentified, and Mr. Rossmiller. Both were entrepreneurs. Mr. Coventry with boats, motors, and cars when they became available, and Mr. Rossmiller with fishing equipment, ice storage, and delivery. This is a 1901 picture of the L.C. Porter home. Through the years, it has been used for community church services, Reverend Lamar Residence, Sunny Grome Roadhouse, Joe Capone's Bar and Restaurant, Ma's Bar and Restaurant, the Red Rooster Bar and Restaurant, Crow's Nest, and now the Boardroom. In 1990, it was converted into a combination office building above and bar below. A 1920 shore scene in front of Huskohar's Dance Hall. Same area, but 70 years later. Charles Palmer designed and built the Scow, referred to by sailors as the Sea Boat. His manufacturing plant was just east of the Catholic Church on 3rd Avenue, later moved to the lakefront where it was destroyed by fire in 1934. The Fontana Swimming Beach, 1910. The road ran close to the lake's edge, and at times, especially with a strong east wind, the waves would break across the road. The electric poles were installed in 1909. Center background can be seen the Glenwood Springs Hotel. About 1910, a view looking east from West Main Street. About 1915, a south view from the intersection of Lake and 3rd Avenue. This is a 1990 view from the intersection of Lake and 3rd Avenue looking south. Looking west from the intersection of Lake and 3rd Avenue as it appeared in the summer of 1990. Lake Drive looking south from 3rd Avenue. The wooden bridge in the foreground was for an overpass for the ice chute, a guide for the blocks of ice being transferred from the lake to the storage barns. The people are, left to right, Gene Rossmiller, Hugh Sullivan, Lot Coventry, unidentified, shoe shine stand operator, unidentified, and Hattie and Dick Buter. Reed's Landing and Electric Terminal. Reading from right to left, front of Reed's Ice Cream Parlor, Depot, a billboard that had posted the interurban schedules, and Dick and Hattie Buter's confectionery store. Photo, early 1900s. A view from the lake of Reed's Landing. It was the center of activity. The main pier, Reed's Ice Cream Parlor, the depot, the Toonerville Trolley, and Boyle's Ice Storage Barn. This picture was taken in 1911 when Horace J. Douglas took over the operation of the gravel pit. The steam shovel was one of those used to dig the Panama Canal. The area is the intersection of Main and Mill Street. Reading left to right on Main Street, Simmons General Store and Storage Barn. The two-story building had living quarters on the top and barbershop and pool hall at ground level. On Mill Street, the bakery on the corner, and last, the post office and Porter's Grocery combined. On the shore path in front of Reed's Landing, picture taking in 1890, view looking north. The same shore path when viewed in the summer of 1990. 1910, Husk O'Hare Dance Hall and Hotel. This site is now the village park that fronts Lake Drive. The dance hall was moved in the early 1920s to 5th Street and converted into a home. The building still is in existence. Same area today, summer of 1990, Fontana Village Park. In 1905, Lester C. Porter was appointed postmaster. As he operated a grocery business at the same time, he combined the two. The picture shows the grocery store on the right and post office on the left. L.C. Porter on the right. All my research on this Fontana football team has been in vain. If any of you viewers can shed any light on this mystery, please send me the information. May Simmons, teacher, class of 1910-1911. The only identified student is Lester Orcutt, third from left, front row. The crew and service personnel of the Alert. Left to right, Mr. Hoft, Walter Robinson, Amos Robinson, the engineer, and the captain, Clifford Sullivan. The little sailor in the front, Merrill Robinson. The excursion steamer Harvard, launched in 1892, 8 tons of railway iron was placed in the hull and ballast, but it still remained top-heavy and would roll from side to side in rough water. In 1931, the superstructure was removed and the hull taken out to the deepest part of the lake and sunk. This 1916 photo shows the excursion boat Alert offloading passengers at the Fontana Pier. The car tracks are for the small cars that carried coal to the steamers. St. Benedict Church, built in 1916. Previous to the church being built, services were held at the Blackwell home and the pavilion when available. The New Catholic Church at the intersection of Highway 67 and Dewey Avenue. Gravel pit crew of 1915, left to right. Bill Reed, M. Henry, Bob Stevenson, next to unidentified. Bill Porter, Howard Giles, Charlie Holzel, Bill Holzel, and Fred Simmons. Gravel pit crew of 1918, left to right. Lester Orcutt, Bob Stevenson, Joe Robinson, Earl Robinson, and Bill Porter, steam shovel operator. 1922, Coventry's garage on the lakefront. Reading from left to right, unidentified, T. Coventry, Mrs. C. Coventry, unidentified, Lot Coventry, and Lester Orcutt. Coventry's garage today, summer of 1990, a building housing many businesses. This was the main pier at Reed's Landing, 2 of the local boys modeling swimsuits of that era. Early 1920s, Myron Green and Merrill Henry. Background left, depot, electric trolley, and the top of Boyle's Ice House. Fontana celebrated its centennial in June of 1931. In addition to 3 days of pageantry, large stones bearing historical plaques were placed at various sites throughout the village. The one in this picture is located at the intersection of Foot and Kinsey Streets. The plaque reads, "The lodge of the Potawatomi chief, Bigfoot, stood a few feet south of this point until the removal of the Indians in 1836. As the Kinsey party departed Bigfoot's village, Mrs. Kinsey recorded in her diary, "The trail was a creek bed filled with loose stones." She was describing what we knew as Highway 36, as it left the village to the north. photo taken in the late 1920s. Reuben Dade, born 1858, an early settler in the Fontana area. His early years were spent farming and as a blacksmith. His next venture was the purchase and operation of the pavilion as an amusement center. But his love for animals finally won out, and he opened the Cozy Oak Stables. The following photos are of his stables. Barn dances were held above in the riding stables. This photo was taken in 1923. Russell and Guinevere Dade, front and center. 1926. A posse forming up. Left to right, John Mulligan, the village blacksmith. Joe Preston, the stableman. John Dade, a private citizen. Tom Boisfort, a friend of the sheriff. Reuben Dade, the owner of the ranch. Russell Dade, his grandson. The village of Fontana purchased the Reuben Dade riding stables and built shops and barns to house the village equipment. In honor and memory of Reuben Dade, the road has been named Dade Avenue. 1924, First Village Board of Fontana. Back row, left to right, L.C. Porter, Ed Adams, G. Grosbeck, L. Coventry, C. Stevenson, H. Sullivan. Middle row, H. Vendresser, M. Quinn, L. Buckles, President, J. Simmons, C. Douglas. Front row, F. Lemur, Elaine Featherstone, F. Featherstone. 1924, 3rd Avenue starting just south of Highway 36, now 67, terminates at the lake. In the mid-1920s, a property owner was drilling for a well and struck an artesian. As it was flooding his property and the adjacent lands, it was piped across Main Street and into the drainage ditch. The water was of such excellent quality that many people would cart it home for drinking and cooking purposes. 1925, the only picture of the village blacksmith that could be found. Name John Mulligan. Previous to Mr. Mulligan, Mr. Reuben Dade was the blacksmith. Blacksmith's shop as it appears today. Merrill Robinson's Midway Garage until the 1960s. Changed owners and now an auto repair facility. 1926, Bill Reed's Fisherman's Headquarters. Reed Swimming Pier and High Dive on the left. McCool's Sandwich Shop now takes the place of Reed's Fisherman's Headquarters. A 1926 photo looking southeast from 3rd Avenue. What a difference 64 years makes. The Fontana Village Ball Diamond now occupies this area. Mr. L.P. Coventry, operator of a garage on the lakefront, feeding the ducks and geese that stopped at the pond. Photo taken in the 1920s. June of 1931, Fontana celebrated its centennial. Pictured are Indians in one of their ceremonial dances. Man in center is Fontana's first mayor, Mr. L.G. Buckles, and to his center, Mr. Carlos Douglas, one of the first settlers in the Fontana area. George Featherstone and Chief Bigfoot's grandson, Chief Coquados, 1935. The largest ice boat on the lake in 1935. Owner C.D. Higgs. Name of ice boat, The Shadow. George Featherstone, one of the local inhabitants in the white stocking hat. Fontana lakefront looking north from the bridge that spans the outlet of the Fontana Stream, summer of 1938. The Fontana Beach in 1938. The Fontana Beach and Bathhouse, the summer of 1990. Quite a change. It once had a nice lawn to within 20 feet of the water and catalpa trees its entire length. In the early 1890s, a Dr. Terrell built this lakefront home and called it Nirvana. Its location was just south of the Coventry's garage. Through the years, it has changed from a private home to a restaurant and rooming house, a tavern and rooming house, and finally, a tavern. This photo taken in 1938 shows it operating as a tavern and rooming house. In the late 1980s, it was destroyed by fire. It was replaced immediately by this new structure, which is carrying on the tradition of serving fine food and cocktails. Sailing the Stia Topaia, in the foreground Mr. Harold Foote, the village president from 1932 to 1948. At the helm, Mr. Sam Johnson, the presidential bodyguard. If anyone knows the Greek language, translation of the boat's title will be easy. I am ever grateful to the following for their contributions of photographs and historical data. Again, if you have any additional history and photos, please contact A.P. Kemet, Route 1, Box 184, Darien, Wisconsin, 53114, or call 414-724-5239.